Hey guys, tonight we fall straight into the mud-soaked boots of a World War II soldier. The air smells like grease and fear. Your civilian life disappears faster than a fresh donut in the mess hall. You're standing in your kitchen one moment, brushing toast crumbs from your undershirt. And the next, there's a knock on the door, a paper in your hand, and a future filled with explosions and very questionable coffee. You don't get to negotiate. You don't even get to pack. Welcome to conscription, where the choice is simple: serve or no. Actually, there isn't a second option. And spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you're all tuning in from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. It starts with a knock. Not a loud, dramatic one. Just two casual raps that somehow upend your entire life. You open the door to a clipboard, a uniform, and a man who looks like he's memorized the phrase, "You've been selected for service." There's no dramatic music. Just your mother in the kitchen, slowly turning around with a dish towel in her hands. You already know she'll be crying before the kettle boils. You don't have a say. The draft board said yes. So, your name's now property of the government. The letter is impersonal, but the message is clear. You are no longer a civilian. You are not you. You are private something or other. Welcome to the meat grinder. The first thing they take is your name. Then your hair. Your long-forgotten mop is buzzed off by a man who looks like he's been cutting recruits down to baldness since Caesar crossed the Rubicon. He doesn't speak. He doesn't smile. He just shears. Like a farmer with somewhere better to be. Your scalp tingles in protest. You feel naked? Less like a man, and more like a peeled potato in army green. You're herded onto a train, like livestock, sitting knee to knee with boys who look just as shell-shocked as you. Someone tries to joke about getting lucky in Europe. No one laughs. One guy vomits into his own helmet. Welcome to the camaraderie. Boots squeak. The uniforms itch. Everything smells like dust, metal, and anxious sweat. You try to remember your high school geometry teacher's name, just to ground yourself, but it's already slipping. That's when it hits you. This isn't a drill. You're being shipped out. Somewhere distant. Somewhere dangerous. You are very much going to war. Your family waves from the platform as the train lurches forward. Your mother holds a handkerchief to her lips. Your little sister doesn't understand why you're not waving back. And you stare until they disappear behind the blur of buildings and trees. After that, it's just the rhythmic clatter of the rails and the rising panic that your life will never go back to how it was. You arrive at the induction center, where the bureaucracy is its own form of warfare. You sign things you don't read. You're poked, prodded, measured, and pronounced fit for duty despite the fact that you fainted during your last dental cleaning. The doctor checks your feet, your hearing, and your moral character, which seems wildly optimistic for a man who just gave you a tetanus shot without warning. That night, you lie awake on a cot that smells like wet canvas and regret. A dozen men snore in rhythm. One whispers prayers into his sleeve. Another hums the same 4 notes of a lullaby over and over. No one speaks openly about fear, but you can feel it thick and sour in the air, like unwashed socks. You wrap your blanket tighter and pretend this is all some elaborate joke. Any second now, someone's going to yell, "Gotcha," and give you back your old life. But dawn comes instead. You rise before the sun. Reveille blasts like a trumpet solo performed by the devil's dentist. Your bunkmate falls out of bed trying to reach his boots. Everyone stumbles into line. One guy forgot to wear socks, and now has a blister that looks like a second toe growing sideways. The sergeant arrives, eyes scanning you like a disappointed father at a school play. He introduces himself with a scream and a string of insults, so creative, you briefly wonder if he moonlights as a stand-up comic. You learn how to stand still, how to fold underwear into compact, soul-crushing squares, how to eat in 3 minutes or less and digest even faster. Your meals are brown, vaguely warm, and served with a side of existential dread. Someone finds a beetle in their mashed potatoes. He names it George and carries it around in a tin until the sergeant makes him stomp on it to prove he's ready to kill. Each day is a blur of sweat, sunburns, and the slow death of your former personality. Your opinions don't matter here. Your quirks gone. You are a cog in a very large, very loud machine, but slowly, without realizing it. If you start to change, you get used to the shouting, you memorize the steps, you run faster, shoot straighter, your body toughens, and so does your mind. You even start calling that awful sergeant sir. Not because you respect him, but because your survival depends on it. There's one guy in your unit who keeps a tiny journal. He hides it in his boot. You catch a glimpse of a drawing something that looks like his girlfriend's face. It reminds you that everyone here is someone else to someone else. That kid with the stutter, a trumpet prodigy. The one with the missing front tooth, a baker. And you still not sure what you are now. Then the orders come. Deployment. Overseas. The war has waited long enough. You write one last letter home. Though the censors will probably blot out anything interesting. You tell your mom you're fine. You tell your dad you'll make him proud. You tell your sister to feed your goldfish and not to let him watch scary movies. Then you seal the envelope and wonder if you'll ever get the chance to lie to them again. On the transport ship, seasickness is a rite of passage. Half the men are green by sunrise. You cling to your hammock like it's a life raft, swallowing back nausea and fear. A few guys play cards. A few just stare at the sea like it might offer answers. One night, Manzings. Just one voice. Soft and low. A folk song you barely remember. It echoes across the bunks and settles like dust in your bones. You hum along. Not because you're brave, not because you're ready, but because you need to remind yourself there's still something human left in all of you. You're not even sure what day it is when you finally hit the shore. Time's been swimming in circles since you boarded that boat. And your stomach never quite got the hang of the ocean's personality. But here you are, boots scraping against foreign soil. The sky, a shade grayer than anything you remember back home. The landing isn't cinematic. There's no sweeping orchestra. Just wet sand, shouts, and the faintest stink of oil, salt, and burnt cordite. Welcome to the front lines. Soldier, you haul your pack like a mule. Rifle, digging into your shoulder with every step. The beach is chaos. Half mud, half men. All confusion. Somewhere nearby, a truck is stuck axle deep in a puddle that might as well be a trench. Someone else is arguing with a captain who has clearly never touched mud in his life. A private drops his canteen and is instantly berated, like he just launched a grenade at a nun. You blend in. You become part of the machine. And deep down, you start to wonder if it'll ever spit you back out. The orders are barked, not given. You move inland, past a village that's half bombed, half abandoned, and fully miserable. A goat watches you march by with the judgmental eyes of a retired drill sergeant. The locals don't wave. Most don't even look at you. They've seen soldiers before too many, and they know better than to get attached to passing uniforms. You try to remember the faces of the guys in your squad. But all the helmets look the same now. One of them, Simmons, or maybe Samuels, has a picture of a woman taped inside his helmet. She's smiling. He isn't. Another guy has drawn a comic on his canteen with charcoal, a stick-figure sergeant exploding into a cloud of coffee beans. You want to laugh, but your mouth's too dry. By the third day, your feet have opinions. They hate your boots, despise the terrain, and have filed a formal complaint with your knees. The path winds through what used to be farmland. Now, pockmarked with craters and the occasional burned-out tank, you spot an old bicycle leaning against a tree. Its tiersmilde, its seat charred. Someone once rode that to market. Now it's a war relic, and you haven't even seen combat yet. Your first firefight comes unexpectedly, which you're told is normal. You're crouched near a barn that smells like ash and manure when bullets start whispering through the air. You don't even hear the shot that kills the guy 2 rows down. You only see him drop, like a puppet with the strings snipped. Training kicks in. You hit the ground, heart hammering so hard it feels like your ribs might snap. You fumble with your rifle. I forget to flick the safety. Remember, just in time. You fire. At what? At where? You're not sure. You just shoot, because everyone else is, and your body's in charge now. The enemy is invisible. Shadows in trees. Phantoms behind ruined walls. You don't see their eyes. You don't hear their words. You just know. They want you just as dead as you want them. One grenade lands too close. You feel the heat. The hiss of air being torn apart. Dirt sprays over you like confetti at the world's worst birthday party. You taste copper. Maybe your lip. Maybe someone else's. Eventually, it stops. Silence crawls back like a nervous cat. You unpeel your face from the mud and check your limbs. All present. More or less. Someone shouts for medics. Another tries to light a cigarette with shaking fingers and fails 5 times. You find yourself staring at the guy who dropped. He's still there. His eyes are open. So are his dog tags. They hand you a shovel. No words. Just the steel and a nod. You dig because someone has to. The ground is stubborn. Still half frozen. You're not good at graves. But you try. He gets a shallow one. A cross made from splintered fence posts. You don't know his first name until you read it on the tags. You mutter it under your breath. Like a prayer or a spell. It doesn't feel like enough. You move on. That's the rule. The dead don't get goodbyes. Just boots stepping around them. You patrol a village the next day. The buildings are hollowed out. Skeletons of what they once were. A child's shoe lies in the middle of a bomb crater. You don't look at it too long. Someone finds a bottle of wine hidden under floorboards and passes it around like communion. It's sewer. Grittu. Probably vinegar. But no one complains. You drink because it tastes like before. The rain comes sideways, carried by winds that smell like metal. Your uniform never dries. Your socks rot. Mold blooms on your collar, like it's springtime for fungus. You start to forget what warm feels like. You stop caring about appearances. Everyone stinks. Everyone's itchy. The lice have unionized, and they want back pay. At night, you try to sleep. But every snap of a twig jerks you awake. Someone swears they saw movement. Someone else fires a round into the darkness, just to be sure. You curse him under your breath as you roll over. You dream of your bed back home. But in the dream, it's filled with mud and blood, and your alarm clock is a landmine. Your meals are cold, usually from a can. Sometimes from a dented pot, if the cook's in a good mood. The best days come with actual bread. The worst days come with hardtack that could double as shrapnel. You learn to eat fast, in silence. Conversation happens only between chews, and usually consists of, "What's this supposed to be?" and "Don't ask." One morning, you're told to take a hill, just like that. Take the hill, as if hills are coins you can scoop up in your pocket. You climb with a dozen others, every footstep crunching frost and nerves. Bullets whistle again. Mortars bloom like deadly flowers. You crawl over rocks that slice your palms. You reach the top, panting, dizzy, your breath fogging the air like a dragon's snort. And somehow, it's quiet. You hold it. You defend it. You survive. Later, the captain says, "Good work, men," and walks off. That's it. No medals. No hot meal. Just a nod, and a hill full of new ghosts. Historians still argue whether these hills and skirmishes had any real strategic value, or if they were just chalkboard fantasies from generals far removed from the mud. But in that moment, it didn't matter. You held the hill. You didn't die. That was enough. The days blend. You grow calluses in places you didn't know could harden. You start calling things civvies and clicks and grunts. You forget the sound of your own laugh. Then, one evening, someone pulls out a harmonica. It's dented, warbled, and played badly. But the melody off-key and trembling cuts through the smoke and gloom like a little slice of something almost beautiful. You sit beside the player. You don't talk. Just listen. Just breathe. You wake up to a scream that's not yours. The sky is still that dark, iron gray, and your breath curls in front of your face like mist from a hot spring. Only this one smells like damp socks and yesterday's stew. The scream came from Jenkins, his sitting bolt upright, eyes wild, gasping, like someone just tried to drown him in his dreams. No one says anything. No one asks. Everyone just rolls over. Because everyone's had that scream, at least once by now. You're due for another one any night. They say the war is mobile now, which is a polite way of saying you'll be walking a lot and probably not toward anything fun. Your pack is heavier than it was yesterday. Strange how that happens. You haven't added anything. If anything, you've lost some gear in that last retreat. But somehow, your spine disagrees. It creaks with each step like a haunted staircase. Your boots are wet, as always, and your socks are chewing your feet down to the bone. But onward you go. Trenches appear like scars in the landscape. They're not the deep, tidy ones from the old Great War postcards. These are shallow, haphazard, dug in a panic with shovels and curses and bare hands. You drop into one and instantly regret it. It smells like feet, urine, gunpowder, and desperation. You crouch, shoulder to shoulder with your brothers in grime, trying not to think about what might be floating in the puddle next to your knee. There are rats. So many rats. Big ones. Bold ones. Some even have names now, Petey. Sergeant Whiskers. One, the guys insists, is named Karl Marx because he keeps stealing from everyone equally. You don't shoo them anymore. You just reach an understanding. They get the crumbs. You get a brief distraction from wondering whether the guy in the next trench has been eyeing your rations. You hear a thump. Just one. Then, a whistle. Then the sky explodes. Artillery. It tears the air like God's own sledgehammer. You hug the wall of the trench. Fingers clutching the dirt. Eyes squeezed shut. The earth shakes. You feel it in your teeth. In your guts. In the part of your brain that still wants to go home and hug your mom. Someone's screaming again. You don't know if it's fear or pain. Could be both. When the shelling stops, you blink and blink, trying to see through the dust. One of the sandbags is gone. So is half of Miller's helmet. Miller's not talking. You grab your gear and move, because waiting means dying. And you've got a whole list of things you haven't done yet. Like kissing someone without the taste of gun oil in your mouth. You're rotated to a forward outpost the next day. It's less a fort and more a collection of sticks. Mud. And ambition. The latrines are a trench over a trench. And the smell could make a skunk cry. You dig a foxhole beside a dying pine tree, hoping the roots don't get offended. It rains that night. Of course it does. Rain finds its way into everything: your boots, your rifle, your dreams. Still, you manage to get some sleep, cradling your rifle like a teddy bear. You dream of pancakes. You wake up to gunfire, ambush. The enemy is closer than expected. The world becomes noise and smoke. You return fire. But your hands are shaking. You see someone maybe from your unit drop beside you. Blood splashes your face. Hot and fast. And you don't stop shooting. You don't breathe. You just become the motion of survival. Click. Aim. Fire. Duck. Move. Fire. When it ends, you don't remember the middle. Just the silence afterward, punctuated by sobs and coughs, and the sound of someone trying to pull a boot off a mangled foot. You help bury a few bodies. Yours didn't eat today. Not yet. Back at the main trench. You scrape mud off your rifle like it's a sacred ritual. It is, in a way, the only thing that keeps you breathing. The sergeant gives a speech you barely hear. Something about bravery and holding the line. You think about asking for extra socks instead. A couple of new guys show up the next morning. Fresh uniforms. Wide eyes. No idea what's coming. You don't say much to them. No point. They won't be around long enough to remember your name. One of them asks what it's like to fire your weapon at someone. You lie. Say it's like shooting at cants back home. You don't mention the way your stomach turns, or the dreams where the can screams back. You're given a small break. R. They call it rest and relaxation, which really just means no one is actively shooting at you while you still sleep on the ground. You and the squad end up in a bombed-out farmhouse. There's a chair with 3 legs, a cracked teacup, and a mirror that's somehow still whole. You look into it and don't recognize the man staring back. He's thinner, paler. His eyes are elsewhere. Someone finds a gramophone. It barely works. but it manages to wheeze out a tune's scratchy jazz. The kind your grandma might have danced to. You sit and listen, biting into stale bread and pretending it's Sunday dinner. For a moment, it almost works. You go back out the next day. You're on patrol through woods that whisper. Every branch feels like a rifle barrel. Every bird call feels like a warning. You startle at a deer. Then you laugh, dry and bitter. Deer's probably seen more action than I have. Someone mutters. You come across a field littered with rusted helmets. No bodies, just their echoes. You step carefully, like the ground might remember what it buried. You wonder how long it takes for grass to grow over a war. A month, a year, ever. The medic in your unit, Ramirez, tells you a joke about a Frenchman, a German, and a mule. It makes no sense. You laugh anyway, mostly because his mustache is uneven, and he insists it's for aerodynamics. It's the first time you've laughed in a week. It hurts. Historians still argue whether the constant low-level stress or the sudden shock of battle does more damage to a soldier's mind. You stop caring. It all blends together anyway. One moment you're scraping mud from your helmet. The next, you're ducking shrapnel from a mortar that wasn't supposed to land that close. That night, you huddle in the trench, watching the stars, wondering how something can be so quiet and so cruel. You see a shooting star and think about making a wish, but the only one that comes to mind feels too selfish to say aloud. So you just close your eyes and pretend you're home. Just for a minute. A rat crawls across your boot. You don't flinch. You name it Gerald and go back to sleep. You wake up half buried in your own trench, courtesy of a midnight mortar that came closer than usual. The air still carries the taste of scorched wood and iron. You brush dirt from your face and blink until your vision steadies. Beside you, someone groans, not wounded, just annoyed about having to dig himself out again. The war doesn't care if you've already been shelled once today. It doesn't run out of bad ideas. Trenches twist like intestines across the landscape. You navigate them by feel now, turning corners like a rat in a maze. Some paths are flooded waist deep, others half collapsed. One poor soul tried to reinforce his section with sandbags and hymn pages. You're not sure if it helped, but his trench smells faintly of old incense. He calls it the cathedral. Everyone else calls it that one with the leaky roof. Everything's damp. Your socks squelch. Your underarms itch. You're convinced you're growing mold somewhere personal. The field manual never mentioned how to manage mildew in your armpits. You steal some chalk from the munitions crate and powder yourself like a Victorian ghost. It helps. For about 10 minutes. Then, the lice return with reinforcements. The trench rats are getting bolder. One tries to drag a tin of beans right out of Jenkins' hand during lunch. He shrieks. The rat wins. You've learned to negotiate with them crumbs in exchange for not chewing through your bedroll. Some of them look big enough to qualify for conscription themselves. Someone paints one with a tiny red cross and names it Doc. It becomes the unofficial mascot of your section, until someone catches it sitting on a corpse's shoulder. That ends the laughter for a while. Mud is everywhere. In your boots. In your rations. Between your teeth. You once found a bullet casing inside your sock. No idea how it got there. You've given up on being dry. The idea of warmth now belongs to fairy tales. Along with showers and your grandmother's apple pie, you would give your last chocolate ration for 5 minutes under hot water. Though you'd probably end up boiling your own skin just to feel something. Still, the trench has its own rhythm. Mornings mean shaving with cold water, and a dull blade army policy says clean faces mean clean morale. You suspect it's more about tradition than hygiene. One guy gave up and just carved a mustache into the mud on his helmet. The sergeant didn't even blink. Maybe he's finally broken too. One afternoon, a message runner arrives. His uniform is torn. One boot is missing, and he smells like adrenaline and regret. He carries orders, reinforce the southern line. Enemy scouts were spotted. Maybe just a recon team. Maybe the start of a full-on push. You pack quickly rifle, spare ammo, a dented can of beans, and move out before dusk. The march is cold. Your breath hangs in the air like ghosts trying to escape. The trees are skeletal. The roads barely more than trails of churned mud. You pass another unit heading the opposite direction. Their faces are hollow. One man limps with the help of a broom handle. No one makes eye contact. It's like watching future you walk by. You reach the southern line after nightfall. It's not a line. It's a ditch with delusions of grandeur. You get handed a shovel. Again, the army loves giving you shovels. You dig through frozen soil. Fingers numb. Every scoop, a small rebellion against the cold. You pile sandbags, slap together firing steps, and mutter about better real estate opportunities somewhere in Switzerland. Then it starts. First a snap, then a pop. Then the world lights up like someone struck a match in a cave. Flares bloom above, casting everything in ghostly silver. You hear boots in the woods. You hear voices. Not yours. Not friendly. You crouch low, rifle raised, safety off. Your heart is trying to break through your ribcage and run away without you. Then the shooting starts. It's everywhere. Bullets whine past like angry bees. Someone shouts coordinates. Someone screams a name. You fire into the darkness, because that's what you're trained to do. They try to flank. You repel. They send a grenade. It lands too close. Your ears ring like church bells in hell. Dirt rains down. Your cheek stings. You don't have time to check why. You reload. You fire. You move. One guy drops beside you. No sound. Just a thud. You think about helping, but you keep shooting. It lasts 30 minutes, or 5 hours. You honestly don't know. When it ends, the silence is unbearable. You check the bodies. Some are yours. Some aren't. One of them has a photo in his pocket of a little girl and a dog. You don't take it. You just stare. And then keep moving. Historians still argue whether night trench raids were acts of tactical genius or just blood-soaked dice rolls. You've made your own conclusion, but you keep it to yourself, buried under mud and memory. Back at the rear line, you sit with the others, sipping from a tin cup filled with something vaguely resembling coffee. The cook claims it's made from real beans. You suspect dirt and burnt hope. Still, it's warm. That's enough. Someone pulls out a harmonica again. You wonder if it's the same one. He plays softly. It's a lullaby this time. You don't recognize it. But it doesn't matter. It's soft. It's human. And in the middle of this mechanical madness, that's rare enough to be sacred. You catch Jenkins writing something in a notebook. When asked, he just shrugs. Names, he says, of the guys who didn't make it. You nod. No yokes. Just a nod. Because someone needs to remember. Then the sergeant appears. Clipboard in hand. Orders. He grunts. Another move. New sector. Of course there is. You shoulder your rifle. Tighten your belt. Shake out your pack. And just like that, you walk off toward another corner of the war, wondering if this next trench will be better, or if the rats will just be more ambitious. You march until your knees feel like brittle wood, and your thoughts unravel into nonsense. The road stretches ahead in a long ribbon of muck and gravel, winding between shattered trees that reach out like broken fingers. Your pack digs into your shoulders. Straps, cutting deep grooves into skin, already rubbed raw. Every step feels like one more betrayal from your own body. And yet, you keep walking. Everyone does. Because stopping means falling behind. And falling behind means getting left. And being left behind in a war zone is just a very long way of saying goodbye. Your new trench line isn't much of a line at all. It's a ditch hacked into a hillside, loosely reinforced with timber and whatever spare metal could be scavenged. There's a rusted stove someone dragged in. Still functional, if you sweet-talk it with just the right angle of breath and prayer. It smokes constantly, coughing little black clouds into the narrow sky above. You're grateful for the warmth, even if it makes everything, including your lungs, smell like scorched beans and wet wool. Then comes the shelling. Not the brief, panic-inducing kind you've come to dread. This time, it's sustained. It starts with a thump, then another, and another, until the rhythm becomes a kind of dreadful music. The whine of incoming rounds slices through the sky, each explosion hurling dirt and fire upward, as if the earth itself is trying to escape. You clutch your helmet tighter, spine curled against the trench wall, wondering not if, but when, a shell lands somewhere behind you. But the blast wave slams into your chest like a charging bull. For a moment, you hear nothing, just silence and static, and the odd sensation of being underwater. Your ears ring like someone struck a tuning fork behind your eyes. Someone nearby screams for a medic. Another just mutters over and over, "He was just here. He was just here." You blink until your vision clears. A hand grips your arm. It's Ramirez. The medic, face smudged with soot and worry. Still breathing, he asks. You nod. It feels like lying. You crawl out of the worst-hit area. Hands shaking. Throat dry. The trench smells like scorched leather and wet blood. One of the wooden support beams has cracked, splinters jutting out like cruel teeth. You help dig out two men buried to the waist in debris. One lives. The other doesn't. You don't say his name. You didn't know it. The rest of the day is blur and exhaustion. You patch the wall with planks and wire. Sandbags stitched together with ration string. You boil snow for water. You eat from dented tins that claim to contain meat, though the flavor suggests betrayal and wallpaper paste. No one speaks much. Even the rats are quiet. That night, sleep plays coy. You lie in your corner of the trench, wrapped in a blanket that smells like fear and mildew, and try not to think about the man whose boots now rest by your head. They used to belong to someone. Now they're just warm and dry. You tell yourself he would have wanted them used. That's what you tell yourself. Anyway, you wake to the sound of digging. Not your unit. Different rhythm. Different tone. You freeze. Listening. Enemy sappers. Maybe. Or your own nerves. Staging a mutiny. You grip your rifle and wait. After a minute, the sound stops. You don't sleep again. Morning arrives in a gray shrug. The captain announces a patrol. Lucky you, your name's on the list. You groan. Sit up. Lace your boots. A patrol means leaving the trench, stepping into the open, playing peekaboo with snipers and mines and the general stupidity of fate. You move out in formation. Rifles ready. Eyes scanning every shadow. The trees loom like giants. The snow crunches underfoot. And every rock could hide a trap. Jenkins hums to himself. It's off-key and weirdly soothing. You spot a crow watching from a branch above. It caws once, then flutters away. Bad omen, or just bored wildlife. About half a mile out, you find what's left of a supply convoy. Burned-out trucks. Crates split open. Shells scattered like children's toys. One truck still smolders faintly. The metal warped and bent. You secure the area. Rifle raised. Heart racing. Then you hear it. A cough. Soft. Human. Alive. You approach cautiously, stepping over a tangle of debris and snow. Underneath a canvas flap, you find him barely a teenager. Uniform unfamiliar. Skin pale and lips cracked. Enemy soldier. Wounded. Alone. He looks up at you. Eyes wide. Terrified. You freeze. The others catch up. Ramirez crouches beside him. Checks his pulse. Shakes his head. He won't last long. He mutters, "We can try moving him. Might kill him." Or he trails off. The silence hangs heavy. You make a decision. You give him water. You don't speak his language. But you look him in the eye and nod. His hand grips yours with surprising strength. Then, slowly, he relaxes. He doesn't die that minute. But you know he will. Just not alone. Later. Back at the trench. No one talks about it. But the silence is different now. Thicker. Not shame. Exactly. Just wait. Historians still argue whether these frontline encounters shaped soldiers' attitudes toward the enemy, or if survival always trumped humanity. In your case, you're not sure. All you know is that the boy's eyes follow you into your sleep now. By evening, snow falls heavy, blanketing the trench in cold silence. You huddle by the stove with the rest, the fingers extended toward the fire, trading ghost stories and half-funny memories from home. Jenkins tells one about his grandmother slapping a bear with a frying pan. Ramirez insists he once dated a movie star. Though no one can verify it, someone mentions Christmas. No one remembers what day it is. But it might be close. You nod and sip something hot and vaguely alcoholic that someone fermented from marmalade and boot polish. It tastes like regret and orange zest. A few guys hang socks on a bayonet. Just to pretend, someone draws a crooked tree on a wall with charcoal and sticks a button on top. You find yourself smiling. Just a little. Outside. The wind howls. Somewhere beyond the line, the enemy listens to the same wind. The same cold. Maybe the same songs. You wonder if they miss their mothers too. You bet they do. You stop remembering the names of the towns you pass through. They all look the same now, charred beams jutting from half-collapsed walls. Broken glass like confetti across the cobblestones. A church without its steeple. Houses with no windows and no laughter. You move like a ghost through these places. Boots crunching through the memories of people you'll never meet. Sometimes a cat darts across a doorway. Sometimes you hear a piano in the distance and can't decide whether it's real or in your head. This is where it happens. Your first confirmed kill. You don't plan it. No one really does. You're sweeping a ruined farmhouse with your squad. The walls are scorched. There's still a kettle on the stove. Long gone cold. You hear a noise upstairs. A shuffle. You raise your rifle. You climb one creaking step. Then another. The moment feels suspended in molasses. And then, there he is. Enemy uniform. Young. Shocked. Eyes wide as soup bowls. You shoot. You don't breathe until the echo fades. The thud of his body hitting the floor sounds heavier than it should. You stare down at him. He looks ordinary. Just a kid. The same kind of wool socks. Same nervous twitch in the left hand. You wonder what his name was. What he was thinking. Whether he ever had a chance. You walk back downstairs. Slower than you came up. No one says anything. Jenkins slaps your back like you just scored a touchdown. Ramirez meets your eyes and doesn't look away. That's worse. That night, you clean your rifle twice. You check your boots for mud 3 times. You lie awake and listen to the wind hum through the cracks in the trench wall. Your hands feel dirty in a way no soap can fix. You write a letter you don't send. The next day, you're back in the dirt. Rifle. Across your knees. Watching the horizon like it owes you money. You try to forget. You don't. You just bury it deeper each time. That's when the rumors start. Enemy armor might be moving closer. Recon says tanks were spotted a few clicks north. No confirmation, but command wants eyes out there. You're volunteered. Isn't that sweet? You join a recon patrol crawling through thick brush and snow. You move silently. Belly flat. Each footstep a negotiation with the earth. You listen to the wind and the birds and your own heartbeat, trying to beat its way out of your chest. You spot something in the trees' movement. You signal. The others fan out. Rifles raised. And then it's there, the tank, a hulking mass of steel and death. Half camouflaged behind branches. Not moving. Engine cold. You approach carefully. Jenkins circles wide. Ramirez taps your shoulder. Abandoned. He mutters. You climb up. Boots, scraping steel. The hatch is open. Inside. The smell is unbearable. Burnt oil. Scorched rubber. And something else. You don't look too closely. One of the crew is still inside. Or was. You take what intel you can. Map fragments. A logbook. You leave the rest. On your way back, Jenkins finds a watch in the snow. Pocket watch. Silver. Still ticking. He hands it to you. Yours now. He says. Don't ask why. You take it without speaking. Later, you open it and find a picture inside a woman. 2 kids. Smiling in grainy black and white. You close it and keep it anyway. Historians still argue whether soldiers in WWI carried trinkets like these out of sentiment or superstition. You'd say both. The line between charm and curse is awfully thin when you're ducking bullets. Weeks pass. Or maybe just days. Time's unreliable now. You rotate between trench duty and patrols. Back and forth, like a human pendulum. The weather worsens. Snow thickens. Your toes go numb, so often you stop checking for color. Your fingertips crack. Your breath comes in short bursts of frost. One night, while writing in your journal by candle stub, you glance up to see Ramirez watching you. Still writing, he asks. You nod. Don't stop. He says, if someone's going to remember, It might as well be you. You ask him what he remembers. He thinks a moment, then shrugs. The sound. He says, of the first time someone screamed and no one came. He walks away before you can answer. The next morning, an enemy sniper takes out a man, 3 trenches down. You never heard the shot, just the soft sound of his body collapsing into slush. You duck instinctively, cursing. Eyes scanning rooftops, windows, tree lines. Nothing. After that, you don't stand up straight again for 3 days. You get used to crawling, to moving like a shadow. You learn to eat with your back against the wall and one eye on the sky. You start to recognize different calibers of fire by sound alone. A kind of grim education. You could write a textbook by now. If only anyone would read it. One day, a package arrives. It's rare. Like seeing a unicorn wearing a postman's cap. Someone back home sent cookies. They're crushed and stale and full of joy. You share them with the squad. Jenkins gets the biggest piece. Ramare sniffs. He's like a connoisseur. You take a bite and instantly cry. Just a little. No one mentions it. You also get a letter from your sister. She tells you, school is boring. The dog misses you. And Mom cries when she thinks no one's watching. She enclosed a drawing. It's you, holding a flag, smiling, in crayon. You fold it and tuck it into your chest pocket. That night, there's a lull in the shelling. The stars come out, shy and shimmering. You lie back on a sandbag and exhale slowly, watching your breath drift upward like it wants to leave your body behind. Jenkins hums again. You start to recognize the tune. It's the same one he hummed during your first patrol. You wonder if he even knows he does it. You pass the pocket watch between you, winding it once before handing it on. It clicks softly, marking time, in a place where time shouldn't matter. The firelight flickers. Someone tells a joke about a general, a goat, and a nun. It doesn't make sense. You laugh anyway. Because you need to. Because the next whistle might be for you. Because if you stop laughing, you might start screaming and never stop. The letter comes folded with care, tucked deep in a canvas mailbag that smells like mildew and diesel. You open it with fingers stiff from cold and anxiety. It's from your father. The handwriting's tidy. All block capitals like he's afraid cursive might show weakness. He tells you to keep your head down, make them proud, and not to forget to clean your weapon properly. Classic dad. No mention of fear, no emotion. Not really. Just the kind of letter written by someone who doesn't know what you're seeing, but suspects it's worse than anything he did during the last war. You fold it carefully and slide it into your shirt pocket, next to the crayon drawing your sister sent a few weeks ago. The paper's starting to soften, curling at the edges. You touch it often. You can't help it. That little stick figure of you is still smiling, holding a flag in one hand and what's presumably a loaf of bread in the other. She always did think your job involved snacks. Then it's time to march again. The sergeant barks something about a new forward position, which is just military speak for somewhere worse. You shoulder your rifle. Your knees crack like dry twigs. Jenkins mutters something about dying before he turns 20. Ramirez laughs and says he's aiming for 21. But only just. You don't say anything. You're trying to remember what 20 felt like. The new position is a trench network, carved into a hillside that looks like it gave up on life decades ago. It's barely deep enough to hide in. Someone's tried to build firing steps using collapsed wheelbarrows. There's a dead tree in the center with a rusted helmet stuck on one branch. It waves in the breeze like some kind of grim mascot. You spend most of your first day reinforcing the walls, which really means shoveling mud from one part of the trench into another. The mud here is thick and pale, like old lard. It clings to everything. Your boots, your hands, your soul. You make a joke about charging it rent. No one laughs. Maybe it was the delivery. That night, you huddle under your coat as freezing rain falls sideways. Your corner of the trench has a leak you can't fix. You hold your mess tin out to catch the drops and try to make a game out of it, 10 points for every splash. You drift into sleep somewhere between raindrops and ration dreams, and then artillery. Again. It begins with a whistle that wakes your bones before your brain catches up. You roll into a ball, just as the first shell slams into the next sector over. Dirt and snow rain down. The second one hits closer. You flinch as the shock wave barrels past, flattening your lungs and jarring your jaw. You press yourself against the frozen wall. Heart hammering. Ears ringing. Someone cries out, can't tell who. Another shell. Then another. The trench buckles. You taste iron. The bombardment stops, as suddenly as it started. Silence settles over the trench like a dust blanket. You look around. Parts of the wall have collapsed. Jenkins is half buried, cursing at the mud. Ramirez checks a soldier who isn't moving. Just like that, gone. You help dig Jenkins out. And he's laughing, hysterically, covered in muck, missing a boot, but laughing. You slap his helmet and tell him to shut up. He keeps laughing anyway. You don't try to stop him again. Historians still argue whether constant artillery exposure did more psychological damage than physical. You have a pretty strong opinion on that one now, especially when your hands start shaking and won't stop for half an hour. The next day, your unit gets orders to advance. Not a full assault, just probing action, which sounds surgical, but mostly means walking into machine gun range and hoping someone flinches first. You move out at dawn. Frost glitters over everything, a cruel contrast to the grimness of what you're doing. You step carefully through the snow, eyes scanning the horizon for the unnatural. The line between natural terrain and death trap is razor thin. You reach the edge of a ruined village, half swallowed by snow and time. Crows circle lazily above. A church stands without a roof. Its bell melted into a puddle of metal beside the door. You take cover behind a stone wall and wait. Then it happens. Gunfire cracks from the tree line. You hit the ground. Bullets punch through the air above. Jenkins swears. Ramirez shouts a direction. You crawl forward, each movement feeling like swimming through glass. You see them, enemy soldiers, flanking around a barn. You raise your rifle. Breath shallow. You squeeze the trigger. Once. Twice. You don't wait to see if you hit. Grenades follow. One lands too close. The blast lifts you briefly from the earth before slamming you back down. Everything turns slow and muffled, like the world is happening in the next room. You blink. Blood on your hand. Not yours. Jenkins is shouting at you. You can't hear him. But, you see, his face panicked. Furious. Alive. You nod. You're still here. When the fight ends, the snow is churned to slush and red. You gather the wounded. Ramirez is already working. Hands steady. Face grim. One soldier, barely older than your sister, clutches a picture of his family as he bleeds. You help hold him down, while Ramirez patches the wound. He lives. Maybe. Back in the trench. You clean your weapon with slow, mechanical precision. Jenkins pace. Ramirez sleeps with his boots on. You sit in silence. The kind of silence that feels like it's holding its breath. You pull out the pocket watch. Open it. The woman and kids are still smiling. Somehow. You wind it once and let it tick in your hand. Soft. Steady. You think about writing a letter. You even take out the paper. But you don't know what to say that wouldn't hurt more than help. So instead, you just breathe. One more time. For now, you march again before sunrise. Of course you do. The army doesn't believe in letting people digest anything, especially sleep. The stars are still out when the sergeant kicks your boot and mutters something about movement north of the ridge. You groan, sit up, and feel every joint complain like you've aged 3 decades overnight. Which, spiritually, you have. The squad moves out in silence. Snow crunches under your boots. Muffled by layers of grime and fatigue, you pass burned-out vehicles, still steaming faintly in the cold, their metal skeletons jutting out from the earth like war-zone gravestones. One truck has an icicle hanging off its headlight. Another has a boot frozen in place on the bumper. You don't ask. No one asks anymore. The forest comes next, thick with fog. Branches heavy with frost. The world feels muted, like it's holding its breath. You scan constantly, eyes darting between trees, half expecting shadows to shift. Jenkins walks behind you, humming that same off-key tune again. He doesn't even know he's doing it anymore. And then it happens again. An ambush. Gunfire cracks like a whip. Bullets shred bark. You hit the ground so fast, your helmet nearly bounces off your rifle. Ramirez is already shouting, returning fire. Jenkins dives behind a stump and yells something you can't hear over the chaos. You crawl to a better position. Heart pounding. Mouth dry. You spot them just glimpses between trees. Enemy uniforms. Moving fast. You aim. Fire. Miss. Fire again. Maybe hit? You don't know. You just keep shooting because stopping means dying. One of them throws a grenade. It lands 10 feet from you. You don't think. You just react. You shove Ramirez back. Dive behind a snowbank. Feel the explosion ripple through your spine. Dirt and branches rain down. Your ears ring like a church bell in a thunderstorm. When the smoke clears, the enemy is gone. Just gone. Like ghosts. But not before leaving 3 of yours behind motionless. Bleeding. Still. You check Ramirez first. He's okay. Shaken. Covered in someone else's blood. Jenkins bruised. But grinning. Because of course he is. You drag the wounded back to the trench. One step at a time. The snow turning red in your wake. That night, no one talks. You eat your rations in silence beans again. Always beans and stare at your boots. They're more holes than leather now. You wrap cloth around your feet. Muttering to yourself about the magical concept of dry socks. Jenkins starts telling a story about a guy who once used cabbage leaves as insoles. You laugh. A little. Because the idea of fresh cabbage feels more absurd than the war itself. Then comes the cold. You thought you knew cold. You didn't. The wind turns sharper than shrapnel. Your breath freezes on your scarf. You rub your hands until the skin cracks. Then keep rubbing anyway. You huddle beside the half-functional stove, clutching your tin cup like its holy relic. Inside it, watery tea. Technically, one guy Peterson starts hallucinating, says he sees a fireplace, crawls toward it. You pull him back gently and wrap him in 2 blankets, whispering nonsense about sunshine and warmth and slippers. He stops shaking eventually. Historians still argue whether frostbite claimed more soldiers than bullets in some campaigns. You'd believe it. Your toes have stopped reporting back. Your fingers are numb, even while holding fire-warmed tin. The cold seeps into your bones like regret. One day, a supply drop actually lands close to your position. A miracle. Crates of food, blankets, ammunition. One even contains socks. Actual socks. New. White. Untouched by trench, slime, or boot rot. The entire unit celebrates like it's Christmas and everyone got a pony. You take your new socks to a dry corner and cradle them like a newborn. You smell them. You try not to cry. Jenkins definitely cries, though he claims it's from the wind. Ramirez starts handing out hot soup made from something green and mysterious. You don't care. It's hot. Morale lifts. Just slightly. Someone finds a pack of playing cards in one of the crates and scribbles fake currency on leaves to use as betting chips. You lose a whole game of blackjack because you can't remember how many 7s are in a deck anymore. No one minds. But the next day, you're ordered to move again. This time it's a long march. 15 miles through slush and fog to secure an abandoned position. You don't know who abandoned it or why. But you have a feeling the answer isn't going to involve cake. The march is agony. Your pack feels heavier with every step. Your legs burn. Your shoulders scream. Your rifle digs into your back like a nagging conscience. You start naming your blisters out of spite. Gerald. Louise. Benito. Ramirez collapses halfway through. You help him up. Jenkins pours a drop of brandy into his canteen. You press forward together, leaning on each other like broken furniture. When you arrive, you find the position exactly as expected, bombed out, half frozen, and covered in spent casings. A few corpses remain. Enemy. No one moves them. You just nod, set up camp, and pretend not to notice the eyes frozen open. That night, a snowstorm hits. You build a shelter using canvas and snow blocks. The wind howls like a wild dog. You huddle under the tarp with 4 others, pressed so close you can feel their ribs when they breathe. It's uncomfortable. It's suffocating. It's the warmest you've been in days. You dream of home again. But this time, home is strange. The furniture is all too small. Your mother has 2 heads. Your sister speaks in German. You wake up sweating in sub-zero cold. In the morning, you discover the latrine pit froze solid. Jenkins jokes about it being the safest place to sit now. No one laughs until someone actually carves a seat into it. You call it the throne and crown yourselves kings of nowhere. And yet, despite it all, you're still here. You didn't freeze. You didn't bleed out. You didn't disappear into the woods like a ghost. You're a little more tired, a little more cracked around the edges. But you're still breathing. You keep walking. You keep listening. You keep watching that horizon, hoping that one day it'll show you something that isn't gray, or cold, or on fire. But until then, you shoulder your rifle, and you march. You reach a village, or what's left of one. The map called it a strategic hamlet. But the buildings are gutted. The trees are bare. And the only thing standing proud is a chimney with nothing to be proud of. The wind moves through the hollow streets like it's searching for survivors too. You and your unit move slowly, rifles raised, boots careful not to disturb anything that looks too intentional. You've heard stories, mines in bread ovens, grenades in flower pots. You don't doubt any of them. The chapel still stands. Technically, its steeple is cracked, its doors swinging like they're waiting to swallow someone whole. Inside, pews are splintered. There's blood on the altar. Not fresh, but not old enough to forget either. Someone finds a rosary curled on the floor. Ramirez pockets it without a word. Outside, if you cross what used to be a town square, there's a well, half covered by a broken wagon. A child's doll lies beside it, missing an eye and one hand. Jenkins points and whispers. Traps you nod. Could be, could not be. But you circle wide anyway. Then someone stumbles onto the root cellar. It's half collapsed and reeks of old smoke and wet cloth. Inside, under a slanting beam and a pile of ashes, are 3 bodies. Civilians, 2 adults, 1 child, curled together like they were hiding from the sky. You don't stay long. No one does. The sergeant just mutters, "Mark it," and moves on. You spend the night dug in along the village's edge. For you're back to a low stone wall that used to be someone's garden fence. Snow starts falling again thick. Slow flakes that soften the wreckage. It would be beautiful, if not for the stench of cordite and memory. Then comes the order dig. You sigh and start carving out another trench. Your fingers raw even through gloves. Jenkins hums. You die. Ramirez sharpens a stick. Not for fighting, but to prop up the tarp he's using as a windbreak. Someone jokes that you've now dug more holes than a gravedigger. You don't laugh. You're starting to think that's exactly what you are. Midnight brings the first signs of trouble flashes in the distance. Then the faint rumble of engines. Enemy vehicles. You tense. You're low on ammo. Low on rest. And definitely low on anything resembling optimism. The captain orders a forward scout party. Guess who's on the list? You move through the woods. Snow crunching underfoot. Frost clinging to your eyelashes. The trees feel too quiet. No birds. No wind. Just the hum of your own breath in your helmet. Jenkins is beside you, his boots barely making a sound. Ramirez trails behind, ever watching your back. You reach the ridge just in time to see them. Tanks. 3. Maybe 4. Painted white. Blending with the landscape like predators. Accompanying them, infantry. Not many, but enough. You report back fast. The trench scrambles. Shovels drop. Helmets clang. You brace for impact. Jenkins grips his rifle tight. Ramirez mutters a prayer in Spanish under his breath. You just try not to think about the last time tanks showed up. Then the first shell hits. The explosion lifts part of the stone wall into the air like cardboard. You hit the ground. Snow and dirt slam into your face. You fire into the smoke even though you can't see a target. Just shapes. Just noise. A second shell lands behind you. Closer this time. You feel it in your teeth. Jenkins shouts something, but you only catch your name. You crawl toward better cover. Heart pounding so hard, it hurts your ribs. Bullets snap overhead. Someone screams. You keep crawling. Then you see him, a soldier in white. Rifle raised. 20 yards away. You freeze. So does he. For half a second. Neither of you moves. Then he fires. He misses. You don't. The shot echoes louder than you expect. He drops. You stare too long. Long enough for Ramirez to grab your collar and yank you back behind the wall. Don't look, he mutters. Not this one. When it's over, the snow is churned to gray slush. The tank's pulled back. For now, you're down 2 men. 1 wounded. 1 gone. You help carry the wounded back. He's unconscious. Leg shredded. But still breathing. For now, that night, you sit beside the fire, rubbing warmth back into your fingers. Ramirez sips something from a flask and passes it to you. You drink. It burns. That's good. At least it means you're still human. Jenkins starts carving tally marks into his helmet. You ask him why. He says, "For every time I thought I wasn't going to make it." He pauses. Ran out of space on the inside. You don't ask how many are on the outside. Historians still argue whether soldiers in the field kept tally of kills, close calls, or just days survived. Most likely, it varied. You suspect Jenkins doesn't care what the marks stand for. They just help him stay tethered to something. That evening, a package arrives. A miracle. Really? Inside socks. 2 chocolate bars. And a short letter from your sister. She writes about school. Says the dog chewed her math homework. Asks if you've seen any tanks like in the movies. You laugh. And then you cry. Quietly, you sleep with the letter in your chest pocket. The way you always do. Over your heart. Because, in this war, that's the one place the bullets haven't gotten to yet. You wake up to something scratching inside your helmet. It's a rat. Not just any rat. One that somehow crawled inside during the night and made itself a cozy nest out of lint. Old leaf fragments. And what looks suspiciously like part of Jenkins' sock. You let out a noise somewhere between a gasp and a growl, and fling the helmet across the trench. Jenkins blinks awake, sees the creature scurry off, and mutters, "Well, I guess it's his now." You don't retrieve the helmet. Not yet. You need coffee first. Or what passes for it out here lukewarm. Krittu. Brewed from desperation and powdered something. It's handed to you in a dented tin mug that hasn't been cleaned since the last guy with functioning taste buds died. Still, it's hot. And right now, that counts as a luxury. The orders come mid-sip. A medic convoy is missing. 3 jeeps left for the frontline outpost yesterday. None returned. Command suspects enemy sabotage or ambush. You're selected to help form a search team. You try to act like it's not a death sentence. Jenkins salutes sarcastically. Ramirez just sighs and tightens his boots. The trail leads through dense forest, crusted with frozen mud and ankle-deep snow. You walk single file, weapons drawn, eyes scanning every branch for something wrong. A squirrel jumps from a tree, and 3 of you almost shoot it out of the sky. You're that tightly wound. You find the first jeep in a ravine half buried in snow, riddled with bullet holes. 1 tire still spins. Slowly. No bodies. Just blood in the snow, and 1 torn medical satchel. You press onward. Sense pricked sharp. The second jeep's worse. It's overturned. Half burned. Inside is a body. Frozen. Jaw open. Hand still clutching the steering wheel like he could have steered through death. You close his eyes. You don't know why. It just feels like the right thing to do. Then, noise. Footsteps. Crunching snow. You drop. Rifle raised. Jenkins beside you. Ramirez to the left. Figures appear through the trees. 6. Maybe 7. Not yours. Definitely not yours. They spot you. One shouts. The firefight begins. You barely remember aiming. You just fire. Retreat. Reload. Fire again. Jenkins yells something and tosses a grenade. It explodes behind a fallen log, scattering dirt and limbs. Ramirez moves like lightning, flanking left, pulling you along. It doesn't last long. The ambush fails. You stand over 3 enemy soldiers now, lying still. Teenagers. Maybe. One still clutching a photo in his hand. You step around him. You have to. You find the 3rd jeep nearby. Empty. 1 wheel missing. The medical crates have been looted. You radio back, convoy lost. Engage was successful. Awaiting further orders, your voice sounds hollow, even to yourself. Back at base. They call it a win. You recovered the site. Took down enemies. Efficient. That's the word they use. You don't sleep well. The next day, something unexpected rotation. You're being pulled back to a temporary rest zone. An old farmhouse behind the line. Barely upright, but still standing. You almost don't believe it until you see it, a structure with a roof. An actual door. Even a chimney. You arrive at dusk. There's hot soup waiting. It's bland. Possibly cabbage. And tastes like boiled cardboard. It's the best thing you've had in weeks. Ramirez cries when he sees a real chair. Jenkins finds a pillow with embroidery on it and immediately adopts it like it's his long-lost child. Inside the farmhouse, there are strange remnants of normal life. A pair of children's shoes by the hearth. A clock that still ticks. A mirror. Cracked, but clear enough to see your own face. You don't look too long. You're not ready to meet that man again. You sleep indoors for the first time in months. It feels wrong. The silence is too complete. No gunfire. No distant engines. Just the wind. You wrap your coat tighter around yourself like armor. But eventually, sleep finds you. In the morning, you explore the farmhouse. The barn still stands. Barely. You peek inside and find chickens. Honest-to-God chickens. No one can believe it. Ramirez names one Lieutenant Cluck and insists he deserves a medal. You agree. He survived this long. That counts. Later. A chaplain visits. First you've seen in weeks. He offers to hold a brief service. You sit on a broken pew with 6 others. Mud still clinging to your boots. Rifles propped beside you. He talks about peace. About grace. You think about the boy in the snow clutching a photo. You say nothing. Afterward, Jenkins asks if heaven still applies to people who use enemy rations when desperate. You say, only if they tasted good. He laughs. A real one. Not the tired version. It feels like hearing sunlight, but rest doesn't last long. Nothing does. Orders return like flies. You're moving again. A new offensive. Securing the ridge. You hear the phrase, and your stomach turns. Ridges mean elevation. Elevation means exposure. Exposure means you become a target before you can finish unwrapping your chocolate bar. You pack up. Say goodbye to the chickens. Ramirez gives Lieutenant Cluck one final salute. You march out into the gray dawn, with mud caking your knees and anxiety hitching a ride on your back. As you move, you hear distant thunder. Not weather. Artillery. It reminds you what waits ahead. You grip your rifle tighter and focus on your steps, one at a time. Left, right. Again, don't think about what's on the ridge. Just the rhythm. Historians still argue whether rest periods actually improved morale or just delayed breakdowns. You don't argue. You know how thin the line is now between okay and not okay. You've danced on it for weeks. But the sun breaks through the clouds for a moment, just long enough to warm your cheek. Jenkins says, "Hey, maybe we won't do horribly today." You nod and smile, even if it's a lie, because it helps. The ridge is exactly what you feared it would be: wind-blasted, exposed, and crawling with the kind of tactical optimism that only an officer behind a desk could dream up. You're told to dig in. You want to ask where? Exactly. Since the top of the ridge is mostly jagged rock and patches of stubborn snow, still, you start digging, scraping at frozen soil with a dented entrenching tool and a growing sense of dread. Jenkins mutters something about building his own grave. You pretend not to hear him. Visibility's decent. That's the problem. The same wide view you get of the valley below is exactly what any enemy gunner would get of you, especially once the sun goes down and the frost starts crunching under every footstep like broken glass. You hunker in behind some sandbags and leftover timber, arranged more in hope than in logic. There's no roof. There's no cover from above. Just sky, wind, and the long wait. The first night's quiet. Too quiet. You take shifts watching the tree line with half-lidded eyes and a trembling cigarette between your fingers. You start to hear things: twigs snapping, whispers, movement just outside the edge of vision. You know it's probably animals. Probably. You don't relax. On the second day, you spot movement. Real this time. Enemy scouts testing the line. You alert the others. Jenkins readies his rifle. Ramirez double-checks the grenade. He's been nervously petting like a cat. They don't engage. But you can feel it, the tension. The slow coil tightening. Something's coming. You all feel it. Like thunder rumbling under your boots before the sky even changes. Then comes the order: hold the ridge at all costs. You stare at the courier who delivers it like he just handed you a riddle carved into a gravestone. At all costs. You know what that means. Everyone does. You nod anyway. You reinforce what you can. Dig a few more inches. Set up tripwire flares. You scrounge for extra ammo. Ramirez finds 3 rusty nails and a spool of string and tries to turn them into a booby trap. Jenkins takes the last chocolate bar from his sock and eats it with ceremony. You suspect it was already mostly foot anyway. The attack comes at dusk. It begins with mortars. Not close. Just probing. Then, silence. Then rifle fire fast. Coordinated. Snapping through the air like angry insects. You return fire. Everyone does. The ridge erupts in noise and heat and flares. Shadows dart between trees below. You aim. Fire. Reload. Fire again. They charge under cover of smoke. You see figures running white coats, pale helmets, bayonets catching light. You brace yourself. Your rifle yams. Your breath catches. Jenkins throws you his without hesitation and pulls out his pistol. He starts shouting, not words. Just sound. A battle cry. Or a challenge. Or maybe just fear, dressed as defiance. The fight turns messy. Close. Loud. Wood splashes. Boots slam. You fire at shadows. Duck behind fallen comrades. Reload with hands that won't stop shaking. Ramirez hurls a grenade downhill and laughs like a lunatic when it lands just right. Then everything goes black. You wake up with your face in the snow. Blood in your mouth. Not yours. You think gunfire still pops in the distance. But it's fading. The charge failed. You held. Barely. Around you. The ridge is wrecked. Sandbags shredded. Men moaning. Some not moving. You sit up slowly. Jenkins is slumped beside you. Blood running down one arm. He grins weakly. Told you I wasn't gonna die today, he says. Then passes out. Ramirez is dragging another soldier to shelter with a tourniquet already wrapped around his thigh. You crawl to help. Your back screams in protest. You ignore it. Historians still argue whether small victories like this actually mattered in the grand scheme of the war, whether holding one hill or one ridge truly changed the course of history. You don't care. What matters is that you're still breathing, that this ridge didn't become your grave. A field medic arrives near dawn. You hadn't even realized dawn came. The sky is pink, soft, unreal, like it belongs in another world. One without mines and mortars and barbed wire. You sip lukewarm broth from a mess tin and press your back against a rock that's warm, only because it absorbed shrapnel all night. Jenkins stirs. Ramirez sits beside you and lights a cigarette with shaking hands. No one speaks for a while. Then Ramirez says, I think my grenade killed a tree. You look at him. He shrugs. It exploded. Nothing moved. But the tree fell. So that's something. You snort. Then laugh. Then stop. Because laughing hurts too much right now. You rest. You write a short letter to your sister. Tell her the ridge is beautiful. And that the sunrises are something else. You don't mention the blood. Or the cold. Or the part where you lost track of how many men you buried before breakfast. You close the letter and tuck it next to your heart. You sleep under the open sky. Blanket stiff with frost. Rifle on your chest. And in your dreams, there's no ridge. No trench. No war. Just the sound of wind in the trees and a horizon that doesn't shoot back. You're rotated off the ridge after 48 hours. Though it might as well have been a year. The relief unit arrives looking fresh-faced and confused. One of them asks if it was as bad as they say. You just hand him a shovel and keep walking. Let the mountain explain itself. You've already said all you're going to say, with your boots and your silence. Back at the reserve line, you get a hot meal. Kind of. It's soup. Technically thin. Greasy. With maybe a potato floating in it, if you're lucky. You devour it like it's a banquet. Ramirez leans back on a crate and sighs so loud it could startle a horse. Jenkins has his arm in a sling and insists it makes him look dashing. Think I'll grow a mustache to match, he says, wiping crumbs from his chin. You suggest he try growing an actual personality first. He flips you off. The usual. Then you get the letter. It's from your mother. Or at least, it starts that way. The envelope's torn. Some of the words are blacked out by the censors. She talks about your cousin getting engaged. How the neighbors are planting beans again. And that she found your old baseball glove under the stairs. She says she hopes your boots are comfortable. You almost laugh out loud at that one. You haven't felt your toes in days. You fold the letter and put it with the others. You've got a little pile now. Small. Soft. More precious than your rations. When the shooting starts, You always touch that stack first. Just for luck. Your downtime doesn't last. The order board goes up. There's movement west. The enemy's pulling back or consolidating. No one's sure. You're assigned to recon the ruins of a farmhouse near a collapsed bridge. It's supposed to be abandoned. You know what that usually means. You and 5 others set out at dawn. The snow crunches beneath your feet, crusty with ice. Trees groan around you in the wind. As if they're just as tired. You reach the farmhouse by midday. It's half collapsed. The roof caved in. The windows blown out. You approach carefully. Rifles up, inside. It's dark and quiet. You sweep room by room. There's food on the table recent. A scarf hanging from a hook. Then you find the cellar. The trapdoor is half covered by a rug. You pull it back. Jenkins whispers, "Don't." But it's too late. You open it. And there they are. Civilians. 4 of them. An old man. 2 women. And a child. All pressed together like they're trying to become one person. Terrified. Pale. One of the women clutches a kitchen knife. The child won't stop staring at your boots. You lower your rifle. Slowly. You hold out your hands. Palms up. "We're not here to hurt you," you say, though you doubt they understand. Still. Your tone is calm. Jenkins lowers his rifle too. The others follow. Ramirez steps forward, speaking softly in what might be the right language. The old man nods once. Very slowly. You leave them some food. You tell command the place was empty. You don't explain why. You just say no signs of resistance and walk away. Historians still argue whether soldiers were right to ignore orders in situations like these, to look the other way when they found civilians. Some say it compromised the mission. Others say it was the only human thing left. You've stopped caring what the books will say. You did what you had to. So you could sleep. You return to base and get assigned to night patrol. Again. The cold is worse now. It cuts. It finds every weakness in your coat. Your boots. Your bones. You walk your sector like a ghost. Every crack in the ice sounds like footsteps. Every shadow feels personal. That's when the shell hits. Out of nowhere. No whistle. No warning. Just a roar. An impact. And then silence. Your ears ring. You're face down in the snow. Jenkins is screaming. You crawl toward him. Fumbling, in the dark. He's alive, but his leg is mangled. Blood steams in the snow. Ramirez appears like a magician. Knails beside him. Unwraps a bandage with mechanical calm. "Pressure," he says. You nod. You press. Jenkins whimpers. You keep pressing. An evac team arrives fast. For once, they carry Jenkins away on a stretcher. You tell him he'll be fine. He doesn't believe you, but he nods anyway. He's gone before the sun rises. You sit on your pack, watching the light creep over the ruins. Everything is pink and gold for a moment. Even the battlefield looks peaceful. If you squint hard enough, then a dead horse slides from a drift and ruins the moment. You rest for a few hours. You don't sleep, just shut your eyes and drift. You dream of strange things. Not home, not war, just flashes. Fire, water, a girl with 2 faces, a hallway that never ends. You wake up, confused, and colder than before. The captain says you're being repositioned again. You no longer ask why. You load up. Ramirez packs his gear with tired fingers. He's been quieter since Jenkins left. You are too. You march through a snowstorm thick enough to chew. Visibility drops to feet. You follow the man ahead by the sound of his breathing. The whole column moves like ghosts, hunched and silent. You arrive at an old rail depot as night falls. There are boxcars on the tracks, their sides riddled with holes. Inside crates, blankets, and signs that people were here recently. The enemy, maybe, or refugees. You're not sure. The scent of wood smoke still lingers. You hole up inside one of the boxcars, using crates to block the wind. It's not warm, but it's better than the trench. You wrap your scarf tighter, chew a stick of jerky, and watch Ramirez carve something into the wall with a nail. What are you writing, you ask? Nothing, he says. You nod. That night, you hear wolves howling in the distance. Or maybe it's just the wind. You can't tell anymore. You fall asleep with your hand on your rifle and your back to the wall. Dreamless this time. Just dark. Just quiet. The quiet doesn't last. It never does. You wake to voices sharp, hurried, followed by boots slapping against ice. The boxcar doors rattle open, and a lieutenant you don't recognize barks. Air activity detected. Everyone up. Now, you scramble to your feet, heart pounding. Still half in a dream where you weren't being bombed. But here you are, again, pulling on frozen gear and diving into another day that starts with the word incoming. Outside, the sky is too clear. That's how you know it's real. Bombers love a clear sky. You scan upward and spot them tiny black crosses at first. Then wings. Then engines, growling like they're hungry. Take cover, someone shouts, which would be helpful if there were anywhere to go. You dive between two frozen crates just as the first blast hits. The world becomes fire and thunder. You're weightless for a second, then slammed back to the earth. Your vision flickers. Your ears scream. Your shoulder hits something hardwood. Maybe. Or Jenkins' ghost. And you're suddenly chewing dirt and blood, and the fear that your legs aren't responding. But they do. Eventually, you crawl, dragging your rifle with you, face streaked with mud and ash. Another bomb drops. You don't look back. You just keep moving until you reach a trench someone dug long before you arrived. Inside it, Ramirez, coughing, half covered in debris. You pull him out, both of you staggering into a crater that's still warm from impact. You sit there together until the last plane vanishes. When it's over, the rail depot is gone. Just twisted steel and broken dreams. A few boxcars still smolder. You walk through the wreckage, counting heads. Not enough. Never enough. You find a boot with no foot in it. You bury it anyway. That night, you build a fire out of shattered crate wood. It crackles weakly, but the warmth is real. Ramirez sits nearby, bandaging his own arm. We were supposed to get a day off. He mutters. You nod. Your tongue's still too thick to talk. In the morning, you get reassigned. The command post was also hit, which means someone panicked and started shifting units around, like puzzle pieces made of meat. You're sent east closer to the front. Again, the map says it's a valley. The veterans say it's a grave. The journey there is long and full of silences. You pass columns of other soldiers, all moving in different directions. No one speaks. Eyes forward, boots dragging. Everyone looks like a ghost with a helmet. You arrive at the valley by dusk. The place is surreal. Snow-covered fields stretch out under a pale sky, bordered by low hills and skeletal trees. It would be beautiful if it weren't also clearly rigged to kill you. Your trench is shallow, patched with burlap and bad decisions. Someone hands you a spade. You don't even groan anymore. You just dig, throwing frozen clumps behind you, praying they'll hold off bullets when the time comes. And it will come. Sure enough, the enemy probes the line that night. You hear them before you see them crunching snow. Low voices. The snap of a twig that wasn't accidental. You grip your rifle. Aim into the dark. The first shot comes from the left. Then, chaos. You return fire. You reload by feel. You move without thinking. Ramidez is beside you, firing short bursts. Someone on your right goes down. You don't see who. There's no time. You toss a grenade. Wait. Then push forward with the others. The skirmish ends fast. Messy. When you count the bodies, you recognize one. Barely. You help bury him in the valley snow. A name scratched on wood, tied to a stick with bootlace. It's the best you can do. You lie awake afterward, staring at the trench ceiling, just a bit of tarp and sky. Your hands are shaking. You clench them into fists until they stop. Then you hear it singing. Soft. Distant. You sit up and strain to listen. Someone enemy or ally you don't know is singing a lullaby. Foreign words. But the tune is familiar. Maybe your mother used to hum it. Maybe not. Doesn't matter. You let it wrap around you like a blanket stitched from someone else's memory. In the morning, it's gone. The sky is gray again. You eat cold beans for breakfast and don't complain. You're told to hold position. Again. Like always, you reinforce the trench. Lay wire. Wrap burlap around your helmet to break the shine. Ramirez finds a dead bird and gives it a mock funeral with full military honors. Jenkins would have laughed at that. You say nothing. Then comes another letter from your sister this time. She says she got in trouble at school for punching a boy who said soldiers are just people who like guns. She tells you she doesn't believe that. She says you're brave. You cry reading it. You fold it. Place it in your pocket. And sit with your back to the trench wall. Historians still argue whether personal letters were more powerful than propaganda in keeping morale alive. You don't care. You'd trade your boots for another one. You'd crawl across this valley if it meant hearing your mother's voice for 5 minutes. That night, you write back. You tell your sister she was right to punch the boy. You tell her you're okay. You tell her you can't wait to see her again. You don't mention the valley. You don't mention the boot you buried. You just say, "Be good. I miss you. Keep drawing." Then you wrap yourself in your coat, hold your rifle like a pillow, and fall asleep to the sound of wind brushing over snowdrifts shaped like graves. You wake up to the taste of metal in your mouth and snow on your eyelashes. The wind has shifted, colder than usual. And everything hurts. Not in a dramatic way, just in that deep, joint-stiff, blood-thin ache that makes you feel 90 years old. You sit up slowly, hearing every crack in your back like distant rifle fire, and take inventory. Rifle check. Helmet frozen to your side. Fingers still there, though barely. Ramirez curled in a ball 2 feet away, breathing like a grumpy cat. Breakfast is bread so stale it could serve as armor. You chew it slowly, eyes half-lidded, wondering what kind of flour survives this many freezes. Jenkins would have called it field biscotti. But Jenkins isn't here. The new recruits are fresh faces, wide eyes, the kind that still believe in clean uniforms and crisp salutes. They look at you like you're some ancient relic, an oracle who's somehow survived what they haven't yet begun. One tries to make conversation. You nod, smile faintly, but don't say much. No one ever stays long enough to finish the conversation. Orders arrive by courier. The valley needs to be held another 3 days. Then relief. Maybe? Maybe. You've heard that word too many times. It's just a carrot dangling in the frost now. But you nod and pass it down the line. Snow begins again by midday. Not the thick flakes of storybooks, but the fine, dry stuff that stings your face and finds its way into every seam of your coat. You work with Ramirez to reinforce the trench wall. He hums an old tune. You hum along, mostly out of muscle memory. It keeps your teeth from chattering. Then you see the crows, 5 of them, circling above the far ridge. You point them out to Ramirez, who squints and mutters, "Bad omen." You don't disagree. Crows usually mean movement. Movement means trouble. You don't wait long. At dusk, the warning flare goes up. You see it before you hear anything. Just a red blossom in the sky. Bright and slow. Then the shouting starts. Positions. Incoming, get down. You drop behind the firing step. Rifle ready. The valley erupts in noise gunfire. Mortar shells. The sharp whistle of bullets, carving air. You return fire. You shout to Ramirez. You reload faster than you ever thought you could. The enemy charges through the trees, white coats blending into snow. A rifle's raised. Bayonets flashing. You fire into them, heart pounding. Every breath sharp with smoke and cold. Someone to your left goes down. You step over him. At one point, you run out of bullets and throw a rock. You miss. Ramirez laughs mid-reload. You throw like a poet. He shouts. You flip him off and grab another clip. They fall back eventually, not because they wanted to, because they had to. You hold the line. Again. Barely. When it's over, you take stock. 2 dead. 4 wounded. 1 missing. You crawl through snowdrifts to find the missing one. He's curled behind a rock. Eyes open. Not blinking. You close them and carry him back. That night, no one talks. You sit by a small fire. Legs shaking from adrenaline and cold. Ramirez wraps his coat tighter and lights a cigarette with fingers so numb he nearly drops the match 3 times. You write another letter. You don't know why. It's not like mail's moving fast these days. But the pen feels good in your hand. The paper feels like proof you still know how to form thoughts. You tell your sister about the snow. You say it looks pretty from a distance. You lie a little. Historians still argue whether soldiers in the trenches lost their humanity or just buried it under routine. You feel like it's both. You haven't cried in weeks. Not because you don't feel anything, because there's no time to. Emotions are a luxury. You file them away next to warm baths and full meals. The next morning brings a different kind of chaos, an inspection from command. Officers with clean boots and cleaner fingernails arrive to assess trench conditions. You suppress a laugh. Ramirez doesn't. The major steps carefully around Puddles like they're landmines. He says your sandbags are poorly aligned. You almost bite through your tongue. Afterward, one of the lieutenants, young, nervous, trying too hard, pulls you aside. He wants to learn from veterans. You don't know what to tell him. How do you summarize frostbite? Trench rot. And watching a man die, with your name on his lips. You tell him to keep his matches dry. That's it. He nods, like you've just handed him the secrets of the universe. Later that day, you get mail. Real mail. A bundle of letters that somehow made it through. One is from your cousin, asking if you still remember fishing together. One is from your old math teacher. Weirdly, apparently, your town put your name on a wall of honor. You picture your name painted in red beside the school cafeteria vending machine. And then there's a letter from Jenkins, dated 3 weeks ago. It must have gotten held up in the chaos. He writes from the hospital, describes his leg as ugly but still mine. He jokes about the nurses, says he misses your ugly face, and that when this is over, he owes you the world's worst beer. You read it twice. Then a third time, you tuck it with the others. That night, you and Ramirez share your last bar of chocolate. Just a sliver each. It tastes like childhood and lies. You eat it slowly, eyes closed. Then you sleep. No dreams. Just dark. Just quiet. Just the sound of snow falling on your helmet like the ticking of a clock you're not sure is still running. You're on the move again. No build-up. No warning. Just a muttered command over breakfast and a sergeant pointing to a convoy of trucks that look like they've already seen their own funerals. You pack up in silence, stuffing cold gear into colder bags. Ramirez tightens his scarf. The new guy, Fowler, maybe Fuller, something with an F, keeps checking his magazine, like it might suddenly fill itself. You want to tell him it won't? The truck smells like wet wool, motor oil, and exhaustion. You sit wedged between two others, shoulders knocking as the engine sputters to life. You stare out the back flap at the shrinking valley, the ridgeline, the trench. You reinforced with your bare hands. Gone now. Like everything else, you drive for hours. Trees blur. The wind howls through the canvas walls. You pass burnt-out tanks, rusting in the snow like sleeping beasts. Fields of shell craters. A frozen horse, still upright somehow, eyes wide with winter. No one speaks. When you arrive, it's already getting dark. The new post is a series of bombed farmhouses strung along a frozen riverbank, strategically valuable, which is officer speak for miserable and likely to be shelled within the week. Your assigned shelter is a collapsed barn with 2 standing walls and half a roof. There's hay, though, actual hay. It smells faintly of something almost alive. You sleep that night curled into a hay pile, breathing slow to keep the cold out of your lungs. Ramirez mutters in his sleep. You dream of a train ride that never ends, your boots stuck to the floor, and everyone around you melting like wax. Morning is announced with shouting. A column of prisoners is being brought through. You and the others gather near the road, weapons at your sides. The prisoners shuffle past enemy soldiers, battered, frostbitten, eyes hollow. One of them stares at you. You stare back. He nods once. You don't know why. You nod back. They're marched toward a holding facility up the hill. Ramirez watches them disappear. Could have been us, he says. You nod. Again. Later that day, you're assigned to guard detail. You circle the perimeter with your rifle, and a growing sense that the ground beneath you is too quiet. Fowler joins you. He tries to start a conversation, asks if the war is like the movies. You laugh, then cough. Yeah, you say. If all the actors froze to death halfway through, it doesn't ask again. Then, just after sunset, the sniper comes. You hear the shot. See the man next to you collapse. A clean hit headshot. Instant. You hit the ground. Eyes wide. Heart already sprinting. Ramirez drags the body back. You scan the tree line. But there's nothing. Just shadows. And snow. And silence. The next shot misses. Barely. You press yourself into the earth. Wait. Count. Breathe. Eventually, artillery is called. You watch the shells arc into the woods, tearing up bark and soil. The sniper goes quiet after that. But the quiet feels worse now. That night, no one sleeps. You huddle around a tiny fire. Its light dancing against cracked walls. Ramirez reads part of a tattered novel. He's been carrying something about a sea voyage and a whale. You pretend to listen. Your mind is still on the man who dropped beside you. You didn't know his name. You never will. Historians still argue whether snipers had the highest psychological impact in trench warfare. You could write a thesis on it now. Every time you step outside, your shoulders tense. You don't look at windows the same way. Your body expects a bullet. Like most people, expect a knock at the door. A few days pass in fog. You help fortify the barn. You dig trenches in the frozen soil. You melt snow in your helmet for water. Ramirez finds a pack of cards and teaches Fowler a game with no real rules. They play for buttons. You watch. Your mind feels like it's wrapped in wet wool. Then one morning, something strange silence. No artillery. No gunfire. Just the wind. Through the rafters. You step outside and the world is white. Still. Beautiful. You hate it. Nothing good follows stillness. Sure enough. Orders arrive. Push forward. There's been movement in the next sector. The enemy might be pulling out. Might be laying traps. You're to advance and assess. You try not to laugh when you hear the word. You're not an assessor. You're a guy with cracked boots and a gun that sometimes jams. You set out in staggered formation across the snowfield. Tree flank your left. The frozen river glints to your right. It's quiet. Too quiet. You step carefully. Eyes on everything. You reach the far tree line. No contact. Nothing. You search the first house. Empty. Then the second. Still nothing. The third has a trap door. You pose. Fowler reaches for it. Click. You dive. The explosion is loud. Hot. Fast. You taste dirt. You taste blood. Fowler's gone. Just gone. The snow is red. The trees are ringing. And someone is shouting your name. You can't hear. Not really. Ramirez pulls you back. Eyes wide. Mouth moving. You nod. Even though you don't understand. You limp behind him. Legs. Rubber. You fall once. You get up. You fall again. Back at the barn. The medic says your eardrum's ruptured. Not permanent. Maybe. He says rest. You want to laugh. That night, you sit by the fire. A bandage wrapped around your head. Listening to muffled words and trying to believe any of this makes sense. You write a letter. You say Fowler was brave. You lie and say it was quick. You don't write your name at the bottom. You just sign it. Someone who remembers. The next morning, your hearing still buzzes like a wasp trapped in your skull. You sit up slowly. careful not to jostle the bandage. Ramirez hands you a tin mug of something hot that tastes vaguely like tea and vaguely like regret. You look like death in a helmet, he says. You give him a thumbs up. It's the only gesture that doesn't throb. Outside, the snow has crusted over. The whole world looks glazed in sugar, like some surreal holiday postcard with extra barbed wire. You shuffle through your gear, trying to convince your fingers to function. They do. Barely. Your boots are still damp, your rifle still dirty, and command still wants you to move out. Today's task is supply recovery. A convoy was hit near a frozen ravine a few miles south. You're part of the retrieval team. They hand you a sled. Not the fun kind. This one's made of wood, rope, and rust. You hook it to your belt and set off. It's you, Ramirez, and two others, Collins and Mahler. Both quiet types, both with eyes that look older than the rest of their faces. You walk in silence for an hour. The ravine appears like a wound in the landscape, steep and jagged, the snow blown clean from its edges by the bitter wind. The trucks are at the bottom three of them, nose down, metal twisted like wet paper. Smoke still curls faintly from one. You clamber down carefully, sliding more than stepping. Your knees hate every second. At the bottom, the wreckage is worse than you imagined. You split up. Ramirez checks for salvageable food. You and Collins go for the ammo crates. You lift one heavy, dented, still intact. You lash it to the sled. That's when you hear it. Movement. Up top. You freeze. Look up. Shapes at the ridge. Not yours. Gunfire cracks. Bullets shred the snow near your feet. Down someone yells. You dive behind a wheel well. Heart slamming. Ramirez shouts something, then silence. You crawl toward him. He's crouched behind a broken axle, firing upward with slow precision. You crawl beside him. Return fire. Every round sounds dull in your ringing ears. Collins is hit. You see it a spray of red. A grunt. And he crumples sideways, disappearing into snow. Mala screams, Fias blindly. Then a grenade lands near the sled. You both run. The blast knocks you sideways, throws the sled in a wide arc. You land hard, vision blurred, snow in your mouth. When the shooting stops, the ridge is empty again. No sign of the attackers, just footprints and smoke. Ramirez finds you groaning under a twisted tarp. Still alive, he says. You nod. Barely. Collins and Mahler are gone. You don't speak the rest of the way back. You carry what you could, salvage half a crate of rations and a handful of bandages. Someone calls it a win. You don't correct them. That night, you sit by the fire. Ramirez has a scratch along his jaw. He cleans it with melted snow and mutters about Mahler's last laugh. Apparently, it was about soup. You nod. Because soup has become funny. Somehow. Then you start noticing them. The superstitions. Fowler always wore a red thread in his bootlace. Jenkins never lit 3 cigarettes off one match. Ramirez hums that same tune before patrol. You realize everyone's got something. A pattern. A charm. A ritual. Even you. You sleep only if your helmet is exactly 1 foot from your head. Not an inch more. Historians still argue whether superstition in war was a symptom of desperation or a coping mechanism. You think it's both. When everything else is random, rituals feel like control. The next morning, You get up and do it again. This time, it's a trench rotation. Not exciting. Not deadly. Just soul-numbing. You die. You patch holes. You fix wire. You eat stale biscuits and listen to someone recite jokes they read on a latrine wall. The punchlines are terrible. You laugh anyway. A runner brings news. Jenkins is alive. Still recovering. Still mocking his nurses. You smile for real. Later, Ramirez carves a tiny figure into his rifle stock. You ask what it is. Protection, he says. Does it work? Not yet. At dusk, the snow turns gold. You sit on the edge of the trench, just for a second, and let your hands dangle over the wall. It feels dangerous. It feels human. You pull out your sister's latest letter. She says she got top marks in spelling. Drew another picture. This one's you fighting a dragon. You like that. It's better than what you're really fighting. You pin it inside your jacket, right over your heart. Then you sleep. And this time, you dream. Not of war. Not of gunfire. But of your kitchen back home. Warm. Safe. Smelling like bread and cinnamon. You wake with tears on your cheek and snow in your hair. But for a moment, you're okay. Just for a moment. You're posted to observation duty again. Which sounds boring, until you realize it's just a polite way of saying you'll be perched on a cold ridge for hours, scanning an empty horizon for sudden death. The scope is fogged. Your fingers are stiff, and the wind bites harder than anything human. You sit motionless behind a crude wooden blind, surrounded by silence and snow, watching trees that haven't moved in months and waiting for anything to happen. Your legs fall asleep before your eyes do. Ramirez is stationed nearby with his scope trained on the opposite slope. Neither of you speaks. You've reached that level of friendship where entire hours pass without a single word. When the wind changes direction, you both shift instinctively, like cattle who've learned to smell a storm before it hits. You jot notes into a small pad movement to the west. Maybe a bird. Maybe not. You draw a crude diagram of the tree line. More out of habit than usefulness. No one ever reads these notes anyway. After 6 hours, you're rotated out. A younger soldier replaces you, his face flushed. Breath visible. Nerves obvious. You hand him the scope and say, "Try not to blink too loud." He doesn't know if it's a joke. You don't clarify. Back at the farmhouse, someone's managed to trade 2 tins of sardines for a loaf of bread that tastes like it was baked during the last war. You don't complain. Ramirez slices it with his bayonet and calls it dinner. You eat slowly. Chewing is a privilege. Later, a new group arrives to reinforce the position. One of them, Marek, is from a mining town and swears by a lucky coin he wears on a string. Another, Halbert, used to be a barber and insists on trimming his mustache every 3 days, even if it means using a mirror shard and a knife edge. You realize quickly that they're green but not useless. Their boots are still intact. Their eyes still curious. You envy that. That night, you're placed on rear perimeter, watch with Ramirez and Marek. The 3 of you sit in the snow, backs to the old stone wall, rifles across your knees. You whisper stories to keep each other awake. Ramirez talks about a beach from back home, warm and loud, always smelling of oranges. Marek tries to describe a woman he loved and lost. You pretend you're listening, but your thoughts drift to the letter from your sister. You wish you could read it again, but your hands are too cold to unfold paper. Then, noise. Just a twig snapping, but enough to put you on edge. You raise your rifle. Ramirez flattens against the wall. Merrick tenses. You scan the dark. Eyes stinging. Nothing. More nothing. Then movement. Just a shadow. Quick. Low to the ground. You don't fire. It could be anything. It could be nothing. The silence returns. Heavier than before. Eventually, Ramirez exhales and lowers his weapon. Merrick wipes his forehead with a shaking hand. You stay frozen a bit longer. Just in case. The next day, word spreads a prisoner has escaped from the field-holding area. Enemy soldier. Young. Wounded. Unarmed. Maybe. You're told to search nearby buildings. You and Ramirez take the northern barns. Inside the first one, nothing but straw and rusted tools. In the second, a noise, a cough. You freeze. Ramirez signals. You step forward. Slow. Careful. Behind a stack of crates. You find him. Just a boy. Wrapped in rags. Shivering. Eyes wide. He doesn't reach for anything. Just looks at you. Terrified. You don't speak his language. He doesn't speak yours. You both understand the moment anyway. You lower your rifle. Ramirez mutters. We should report. You nod slowly. But you don't move. You pull a biscuit from your coat. Toss it to the boy. He flinches. Then grabs it. Devouring it in seconds. You step back. Leave him. Say nothing. Later. You tell command. The barns were empty. Ramirez doesn't argue. You bury it with the rest. Historians still argue whether soldiers routinely lied in reports to protect themselves or to protect their sanity. You know better. Sometimes, lying is the last act of humanity you have left. That night, you sit by the fire again. Halberd sings a lullaby in a voice that shakes but doesn't break. Marek sharpens his bayonet for no reason other than to feel like he still has control. You drink something warm from a chipped mug and try not to think about the boy in the barn. Ramirez offers you a scrap of paper. On it, he's drawn a crude map of all the places you've rotated through, marked with skulls, arrows, and question marks. See, he says. Progress. You laugh. Dry and slow. It's better than nothing. You pin the map to the barn wall with a nail and declare it headquarters. Someone adds a smiley face in charcoal. You sleep that night with your coat around your boots so they don't freeze. The wind sings through the gaps in the wall. You close your eyes and imagine warm sand, oranges, and sunlight. But the images melt, replaced again by trenches, blood, and the boy's eyes. In the morning, a message comes in by runner. Another position needs reinforcement. Another ridge. Another useless patch of frozen dirt. You groan, stretch, and start packing. Ramirez asks if you've got that same bad feeling in your gut. You nod. It hasn't left in weeks. He tosses you a pair of mismatched socks and calls them a blessing. You thank him like he handed you gold. You march out together. Boots crunching in rhythm. Rifles slung. Breaths visible in the cold air. Snowflakes drift down like ash from a fire you don't remember lighting. The road ahead is quiet. And for now, you walk not toward glory, not toward victory, but simply forward. Because that's what you do. Because that's what's left. You arrive at the ridge by nightfall. It's worse than the last one, steeper. Vindia, stripped bare of cover like the landscape itself, is tired of offering protection. The trench line here is barely more than a scar cut through stone and frozen soil. Your unit is greeted by a corporal with one eye, a voice like gravel, and a half-joking warning that the last rotation didn't take well to incoming. You take your spot on the line without complaint. You've long stopped expecting comfort. Ramirez stomps his boots against a rock and mutters that if the wind gets any worse, he'll start building a nest underground. Maddox stands beside him, hands jammed into his coat, staring out at the black expanse below like it might blink back. You spend the first 2 hours reinforcing the parapet. Your fingers are stiff and bruised. Your nails cracked. You've forgotten what it feels like to handle anything that isn't frozen metal, damp cloth, or earth that fights you back. You're placed on watch at 0200, the kind of shift meant for people who haven't slept or dreamed in days, which makes you the perfect candidate. You perch behind a broken sandbag wall, eyes on the slope. The wind cuts across the ridge like it's trying to peel your skin. Somewhere behind you, someone hums. You recognize it. Ramirez's tune. Even Merrick's picked it up now. The melody loops endlessly, like a shared incantation against frostbite and madness. At 0313, flares go up from the next sector over. White, then green. No shots follow. Just the sudden bloom of ghostly light over the treetops, and the way everyone along the line straightens at once. Like dogs hearing a distant whistle. You raise your rifle. Wait. Nothing comes. Then it fades. And the silence returns. False alarm. Maybe. You stay awake the rest of the night anyway. Morning breaks over the ridge like a cracked egg yolk-colored light spilling across a landscape too scarred to appreciate it. You sit on your helmet and chew what passes for breakfast. Some kind of hard loaf and salt pork that tastes like salted stone. Ramirez picks icicles off his scarf and says, "Another fine morning in paradise." Merrick writes something in a little book. You don't ask what. Everyone has their rituals. Yours is to say nothing until the sun's been up for at least an hour. At midday, there's movement. Scouts spot figures beyond the far tree line. The tension returns like a familiar ache. You load your rifle without thinking, eyes fixed on the horizon. You wait. You listen. But nothing comes. You begin to suspect nothing ever will. Then, late afternoon shells. They don't scream like they used to. These ones are heavier, slower, like death taking its time. The first lands 50 meters to your left. The second hits closer, spraying dirt, rock, and pieces of trench wall into the air. You duck and cover instinctively, the blast rolling over your back like a wave. Merrick yells, something you can't hear. Ramirez grabs your arm and shouts. Move. You stumble into a dugout. Heart thudding, ears ringing. The world pulses. You can't hear anything clearly. Just the sound of your own blood and the sharp scent of cold iron. When it ends, you crawl back up and check for damage. 3 are wounded. 1's missing. Ramirez finds his boot 15 meters away. You spend the next hour rebuilding the trench wall with broken boards and burned sandbags. Hands shaking from cold and adrenaline, Merrick finds a frozen potato in the mud and declares it lucky. You believe him. That night, you sit in silence, too tired to speak. A bottle makes its way around the fire. You take a sip. It burns your throat, fogs your head, and makes the stars blur. Ramirez says he once dreamed of opening a bakery. You laugh, quietly. You tell him you once dreamed of going home. Historians still argue whether alcohol helped soldiers cope or dulled them into numbness. You know what it does. It buys you 15 minutes of forgetfulness. You hold on to that. You write a letter. Another one. You don't say much. Just that it's cold. That the food is bad. That you're alive. You don't mention the flares. Or the boot. Or the shell that nearly took your head off. You end with, "Tell Mom I remember the garden. The smell of tomatoes." You fall asleep beside the fire. When you wake, it's snowing again. Of course it is. 2 days later. The order comes, push forward. Advance into the valley. Clear enemy resistance. Standard language. Meant to mask the meat grinder behind a layer of formality. You don't protest. You just pack your things and sling your rifle. The march is slow. Snow up to your knees. Trees groaning in the wind. You advance in a staggered line. Boots crunching. Fingers twitching near triggers. No birds. No noise. Just the sound of breath and boots. Then contact. Gunfire erupts ahead. Someone drops. You hit the ground. Crawl behind a rock. Return fire. You see flashes in the woods, enemy positions dug into snowbanks. Rifles poking from behind logs. You shoot. Move. Shoot again. Merrick lobs a grenade. It vanishes into the trees and explodes with a muffled boom. You advance. 1 meter. Then another. It lasts less than an hour. Maybe 20 minutes. You lose 3 men. Ramirez is grazed in the arm. Marek's fine. You're fine. Physically, you secure the ridge. If it can be called that. A cluster of logs and frozen sandbags. You plant your flag. Figuratively, you eat your ration. You rebuild the wall. You sit in the bloodied snow and write another note. No one's reading these letters anymore. Not really. You write them for yourself. You end this one with, "It's quieter today. But I don't trust it." You stay on that ridge for 6 days. The weather doesn't break. The ice gets thicker. And the wind stops. Pretending to be wind, it becomes a voice. Low and angry. Whispering threats through the boards of the trench wall. Your coat stiffens into armor. Your hands crack open like old wood. Everyone moves slower now. Like they're walking underwater. You and Ramirez trade shifts on watch. Speaking less each day. Communicating mostly in shrugs and raised eyebrows. Merrick hardly speaks at all. He sharpens his bayonet every night. Not because it needs it, but because it's the only thing in this frozen world he can control. On the 4th night, someone starts crying. Not loud, just a soft, broken whimper drifting through the dark. You don't look to see who. You don't need to. It could be any of you. It could be all of you. The sound lasts maybe a minute, then gets swallowed up by the cold. You're given a temporary reprieve orders to rotate back to the reserve camp 3 kilometers east. It's supposed to be rest, though everyone knows it's just another kind of trench. Only with fewer bullets and more mud. Still, you welcome it. You pack up, walk stiffly down the slope, and feel a strange pang as the ridge disappears behind you. Not nostalgia, just the quiet knowledge that someone else will bleed there soon. The reserve camp has a tent, an actual canvas tent with a stove in the middle that smokes in all the wrong directions, but gives off enough heat to remind you what heat used to feel like. Ramirez collapses on a crate and instantly begins snoring. Marek hangs his coat by the fire, steam rising off it like a ghost, leaving the fabric. You strip off your boots and inspect the damage. The skin on your toes has turned a shade of purple you didn't know existed. You wrap them in gauze and don't look too long. You're afraid they might start coming off like old bark. They give you a full day to rest. You use it to write another letter, then tear it up halfway through. You sleep with one eye open, trained on the door flap, just in case the war forgets you're on break. On the second day, you made a man named Richter. He's missing 3 fingers and still plays harmonica better than anyone you've ever heard. He sits near the stove, hunched and silent, and plays tunes that make you feel like you're sitting on your grandmother's porch instead of in a soggy tent in the middle of a war. That night, something strange happens. Someone tells a joke, and people laugh. Not politely, not weakly. Real laughter. Loud and stupid. Someone nearly chokes on a piece of bread. You laugh too. It hurts your ribs. But you keep going. You can't stop. For a moment, you feel human again. Then morning comes. And with it, the new orders. Push north. Enemy forces are regrouping beyond the river. The bridge has been destroyed. But the ice is holding for now. You're to cross with a forward unit and secure the far bank. You read the message 3 times. Nowhere does it mention how many didn't return the last time someone tried this. You don't argue. You pack. Again. The river is half frozen. The current black and sluggish beneath a crust of uncertain ice. You tie ropes around your waist and cross in teams. The first man through goes slowly, tapping with a stick. It holds, barely. You follow. Heart hammering. Breath fogging the air in front of you. The ice moans with every step. You whisper apologies to it with each bootfall. You make it across. The others follow. No one falls through. Yet, on the other side, you dig in fast, shallow trenches near the tree line. Weapons ready. You know they'll come. Maybe not tonight. Maybe not tomorrow. But soon, the ground here is different. Blacker. Wetter. It smells like old water and rust. Ramirez jokes that you're digging into the devil's wash basin. Marek doesn't laugh. He hasn't laughed in days. That evening, the fog rolls in thick. So thick, you can't see 10 feet ahead. You and 2 others patrol the perimeter. Moving slow. Rifles up. You hear things, branches creaking. Ice cracking. A faint cough that might have been wind or might have been warning. You tighten your grip. Suddenly, a shot. You hit the ground instinctively. Then another shot. Then silence. You crawl forward, scanning through the mist. You find nothing. No movement. No blood. Just silence that now feels armed. You return to the trench on your belly. Heart thudding. The others are on alert. No one knows who fired. You double the watch. The night stretches long. You don't sleep. You don't blink. At one point, you start hallucinating faces in the fog. Your sister. Jenkins. Even your old dog. You close your eyes and breathe slow until they fade. In the morning, the fog lifts. Nothing happened. Nothing visible. But the snow looks disturbed. Like something passed through in the night. Something watching, Historians still argue whether fear or fatigue caused more soldiers to lose their grip during prolonged engagements. You suspect it doesn't matter. Eventually, fear and fatigue become the same thing. You hold the position 3 days. Then, another order advance again. This time, through forest, you move in before dawn. Trees tight. Snow, heavy on every branch. The silence makes your footsteps sound like thunder. You reach the clearing before the ambush happens. It's quick, close, brutal. Rifles crack. Bullets tear bark. You drop behind a log and return fire. Ramirez dives beside you, swearing. Marek is hit in the shoulder. He keeps fighting. You push them back. Barely. You survive. Barely. Afterward, Ramirez wraps Marek's wound. You help drag another man's body from the undergrowth. You don't know his name. You don't ask. You just dig. That night, you sit by a small flame and pass around the harmonica. No one plays it as well as Richter. But someone tries. The notes are crooked, out of tune. Beautiful. You sleep that night with your boots still on, your rifle still clutched to your chest, and a dream where everything's quiet. Just for a little while. You wake to gunfire again. Of course you do. There's always one more attack. One more scream. One more dawn, with blood in the snow. This one's different. Though not a raid. Not a sniper's whisper. It's a full push. The enemy's desperate. So are you. The trees erupt around you, in a shower of bark and shouts. You roll into position. Sights up. Muzlehut. Ramirez is already firing. Shouting orders like he thinks someone's still listening. Marek's crouched behind the log. Reloading with one hand. His bandaged arm trembling. You move. You don't think. You just act. You sprint through the smoke. Slide into a collapsed foxhole. And cover a squad mate who's dragging a wounded man by his collar. He's screaming something in a language you don't speak. The bullets don't care. You fire 3 times. One target drops. Another bolts. You reload behind your teeth. Snow and gunpowder sting your throat. You feel a sharp pinch in your leg. Nothing at first. Then heat. You're hit. You laugh. Of course you're hit. The bullet didn't go through. Just lodged in meat. Lucky. Or not. Marek reaches you. Pâle. Wild-eyed. And wraps a belt around your thigh before you can even groan. You hold that ridge. Somehow, by noon, it's quiet again. You sit in the churned snow, bleeding into your own boot, and look up. The sky is blue, bright, insulting. Ramirez lights a cigarette with shaking hands and says, "We won." You both know that's a lie. You didn't win. You survived. There's a difference. You pass out cold before you even feel sleepy. When you wake, you're in the med tent. Again. This time, the roof leaks. Your leg is wrapped tight. And someone's drawn a smiley face on the bandage. You bet it was Ramirez. You drift in and out of sleep for a full day. When you're lucid, you write your last letter. You don't say it's the last, but you know it. You write to your sister. You tell her you miss the garden, the bread, the dumb cat that used to knock over flower pots. You sign your name and say you'll see her soon. You don't say how. They don't send you back to the front. The leg's too far gone for that. You're reassigned to the transport corps. Not glamorous, but warmer. You ride in the back of trucks now. covered in blankets, watching the world roll by in fits and starts. You ferry crates, rations, wounded, sometimes letters. Once, you carry a piano, just a little one. No one knows why. No one asks. The war's strange like that. You see men come back from the front with 1,000-yard stares and mud crusted into their souls. You recognize that, look, you had it. You still do. But from back here, it softens a little. You sleep in buildings now, with roofs, sometimes with beds. You eat soup that's still warm. You almost cry the first time that happens. A medic gives you a boiled egg, and you hold it like a jewel. When you bite it, it tastes like forgiveness. You run into Jenkins. He's alive, miraculously, with a cane and a new nickname, Old Peg. He limps over, slaps you on the shoulder, and offers a square of chocolate from the same bar he's been hoarding since autumn. You split it without a word. No rock, paper, scissors this time. One day, weeks later, the shelling stops. The guns fall silent. At first you think it's a trick, a break in the weather, a pause before the storm. But then the mess tent erupts in cheers, and someone yells, "It's over." You don't believe them. Not really. Not at first. But it's true. The war ends. Just like that, you walk outside and stare at the sky. Same sky. Same wind. But something feels different. Lighter. Like the air's finally breathing again. Historians still argue whether peace ever truly comes for soldiers who survive. You know it doesn't, not fully. Not cleanly. You carry pieces of it forever. Buried deep. Whispering behind your ribs. But you also carry the letter from your sister. The drawing. The chocolate wrapper. Ramirez's song. Still echoing. You board the train home with your duffel, and your limp, and your memories. You watch the countryside pass through the window like a dream half remembered. You wonder who you'll be now, who they'll expect you to be. You don't know the answer, but you do know this. You made it. Somehow, you survived what was never meant to be survivable. And as the train pulls into your hometown station, and the cold turns warm again, and the wind smells like bread, instead of death, you close your eyes and exhale. Now, the war drifts behind you like a fog lifting from a dark forest. Your boots are off. The trench is far away. The ice no longer bites your toes. And the distant thunder of shells is replaced by the hush of nighttime stillness. You're not standing guard anymore. You're not listening for the snap of a twig or the hiss of a flare. You're safe now. It's quiet. The war has ended not with cheers or fireworks, but with a whisper, to a long exhale, the kind that loosens every knot in your chest. Let your shoulders drop. Unclench your jaw. Sink into the bed, the couch, the floor, wherever you've drifted off to. Let the cold pass through you like a memory, already fading at the edges. You've marched through the snow, carried your fear, and laid it down. Remember the fire, the tin cup, the harmonica in the cold. You are not there anymore. You are here warm, wrapped up, untouched by the wind that once howled across no man's land. No more rations. No more orders. No more mud that swallows your boots whole. Just calm, softness, rest. Even if sleep doesn't come just yet. Let your breathing slow. Let the rhythm of this quiet carry you farther from the roar of the battlefield and closer to the peaceful silence waiting just beyond it. You've made it through. You've come home, and now, finally, you can rest. Sweet dreams.